I'm going to show you how to structure a persuasive speech. We'll be focusing specifically on how to organize the main points in the body of a presentation. This video is part 1 in a 4-part series on how to write a persuasive speech. Once all 4 parts are posted, I will put a link to the entire list in the expandable description below this video. In the description, you'll also see links to my Communication Coach Academy, where we offer classes and group coaching options, and an entirely free page of resources just for you. It's much easier to understand what a persuasive message design is when we contrast it with a more traditional informative speech. Most presentations in professional settings are not technically persuasive. In fact, the vast majority have the goal of simply informing your listeners to one level or another. We're often sharing information, showing people how to do things, training, teaching, or otherwise bringing people up to speed on an issue. Most informative presentations are structured around 3 basic parts that you will likely recognize: an introduction, body, and conclusion. The main points or buckets in the body of a presentation are typically numbered 1st, 2nd, and 3rd. This bare bones classic structure is what drives most informative speeches. What makes a presentation persuasive rather than merely informative is not simply a matter of delivering the material in a convincing, compelling, or emotionally engaging way. What makes a presentation persuasive is when we are trying to change listeners' minds or behaviors by the end of the speech. Before the presentation, your listeners are at point A, and by the end, you're trying to change their minds or behaviors to meet you at point B. And to do that, we have to structure our message differently to bring listeners along on that journey with us. Now, like an informative speech, a persuasive speech structure still has an introduction, body, and conclusion. The introduction to an informative and persuasive speech are almost identical, in fact. You usually start by grabbing your audience's attention in some way, like telling a story or sharing an interesting statistic. Some people call this your hook or your opening. You then explain why the topic is relevant to your listeners. Next, you establish your credibility as a speaker who is worth listening to for this topic and for this audience. You then give your bottom line or thesis statement, and then you give a preview or a roadmap of the rest of your presentation. With some minor differences, the introduction for a persuasive speech is the same as that informative structure. But the 3 points in the middle of the body of the presentation are organized in a way that take listeners on a persuasive journey. That's where most of the differences are. And that's why we're going to emphasize the 3 body points in this video. Instead of simply saying 1st, 2nd, and 3rd to inform listeners about those 3 items or steps, persuasive messages organize the main points in the body around problem, solution, and benefits in that exact order. Some people use different labels for these 3 main points. Instead of calling the first point the problem, some people might describe it as the need. Instead of calling the second point the solution, you'll sometimes see this labeled as the plan, the recommendation, or the satisfaction step, like they do with Monroe's motivated sequence. People usually label the 3rd point benefits, but it's sometimes labeled as the visualization step or sometimes visualization of benefits. But the heart of these are the same, even though the labels may change. The foundation is the problem, solution, benefits. Now, are there other ways to organize the body of a persuasive message? Yes, and I'm going to show you a few alternatives in the next video, part 2 of this series. Using problem, solution, and benefits to structure your main points is really the classic way to organize the body of a persuasive speech, and I'll prove it to you. I love old television commercials, the classic commercials, because they use this recipe almost exactly. In the problem phase of the commercial, they show some athletes, for example, who are in the middle of an important game and they're exhausted. That's the problem. Next, the solution is Gatorade or some other sports drink. They show people in the commercial chugging some blue or red beverage. Then they show the benefits. Those same athletes with a renewed energy out on the field, making plays, winning the game. A lot of those classic television commercials happen in the kitchen. They show a kitchen that has some problem, like the cabinets are all disorganized and things are falling out because of the lack of good storage containers. This is causing that person in the kitchen stress and anxiety. Next is the solution, which is a uniform nesting system of plastic storage containers. They show the person using those containers to get everything organized and sorted out. And they finish with the benefits by showing a nice, tidy, organized kitchen The inside of the cabinets look great, but most importantly, everybody's happy about this. Advertisers love this because the problem solution benefits points tell a story. This approach takes listeners on a satisfying emotional and psychological journey. The television advertisers stole this formula from the world of public speaking that goes back as far as Aristotle over 2,000 years ago when he wrote a book about public speaking called Rhetoric. But for speeches, we don't want to come across in that exaggerated way like the old TV commercials. I'm just using those examples to help us remember the problem solution benefits points. So how could you use these points in a persuasive speech? We're going to use them in the body of the speech. Let's take a little more realistic example. In a professional setting, you might be doing a presentation in your organization where you're trying to convince your listeners to invest in a new and expensive marketing plan to grow your business. Let's say your company has not been growing much and has been surviving mostly by cutting costs, but you want to convince the company's leaders to change their approach and find ways to grow the business through more marketing. The problem point for your persuasive speech would likely be focused on the fact that many customers are not aware of your product. You might focus on your decreased market share. You might want to talk about the lack of existing marketing efforts happening in your company to show that there's a real issue here that's not working. There's a clear gap or need to get the word out to potential customers. That's the problem. Next, you move to your solution point. In this particular speech, your solution is to recommend an ambitious marketing program. In that solution step, you would spell out all of the relevant details, the exact steps involved in your proposed plan. You would talk about things like the costs, timeline, who would be involved. And then you move to your benefits step, which would be to help listeners see the potential upsides of adopting your solution. You would paint a vivid picture. You might use some success stories, for example, about similar organizations that have engaged in marketing campaigns like this. You could show data and results from past successes in your own company when you've made similar levels of investments. If this were a more technical presentation, you might use some simulations or modeling to forecast future benefits. This example assumes you're speaking to an internal audience, like your team or the leaders of your company. These are people you already know to some degree, but the problem solution and benefits points work equally well for external audiences as well, like a potential client. Let's fill this in with another short example. This time, we'll pretend we're a staffing company and we're talking to a potential client organization, a growing company with whom we want to do business. The problem would be entirely focused on the challenges that this client is facing. With persuasive speeches, you have to tailor your message at every step to your specific audience. For example, we know this company is growing so fast, they're having difficulty interviewing and hiring people quickly enough to keep up with that growth. And because of the growth, they're having an internal strain around responsibilities that are typically handled by an internal human resource department. Things like compensation, benefits, and keeping track of everybody. The solution we're offering is to partner with us. We'll call it XYZ Staffing. We specialize in helping growing businesses scale up quickly. We streamline the interview and hiring process and have a software package that simplifies compensation and benefits. We tell them exactly what the plan costs, the steps involved, how long it'll take to roll out this whole process. We tell them our proposed plan, in other words. We then transition to our benefits point where we show them how this would save them time and money and get them the help they need so they can grow as rapidly as they want to grow. We'd show them how easy the process is to implement and roll out and show them all about the kinds of success stories that we've experienced with past clients, the victories we've helped other client organizations achieve who are just like them. That's how you structure the body points in a persuasive speech using problem, solution, and benefits. Now let's briefly look at the conclusion. The first thing you do is signal the end of your speech by saying a phrase like "in conclusion" or another one like that. You typically then reinforce your bottom line, your key argument for the speech. I consider it then optional to recap your three main points in a persuasive speech. I always do that in an informative speech, but I find it tends to slow down persuasive speeches and isn't really necessary. But in a persuasive speech, you must have a call to action. That's mandatory. And then you finish with what some people call a clincher. This is like an echo of your attention grabber from the beginning of the speech. And you should plan your presentation to finish on a high note like that, with a bang, as they say, and not with a whimper. This structure does raise additional questions that we'll answer in the rest of this 4-part series of videos. One question that comes up is, are there other ways to organize a persuasive presentation besides problem solution and benefits? And yes, we'll look at several other ways to do that in part 2 of this series. Another question, how do you come up with all these ideas and information that fill in each of those main points in the body? The third video in this series will show you how to fill each of those buckets for maximum persuasive impact. And that video will also show you how to appeal to listeners' hearts and minds in equal measures as we fill those buckets. And the last key question we'll look at is how to ask your listeners to take that next step at the end of the speech. And that means in part 4 of the series, we'll look at a persuasive conclusion, and I'll show you 10 ways to call your listeners to action at the end of a speech. As mentioned, feel free to take a look at my full page of free resources on my Communication Coach Academy website. It has entirely free class, for example, on the top 5 essential communication skills that all professionals should have, in addition to other free stuff. Be sure to watch the next video in the series on more ways to organize a persuasive presentation. Until then, thanks, God bless, and I'll see you soon.